She came to divorce court wearing a white designer suit, a diamond smile, and the confidence of a woman who thought I would arrive in work boots begging for mercy. My name is Caleb Turner, 39 years old, born in Ohio, raised by a mechanic father who believed a man's worth was measured by what he fixed when no one was watching. For most of my marriage to Vanessa Turner, I was the quiet husband in the background, the man with grease under his fingernails, a faded jacket in the closet, and a bank account she liked to describe as cute whenever her friends came over. She thought poor meant powerless. That was her first mistake. The courthouse in Columbus sat under a gray November sky that morning, all limestone steps, brass doors, and cold air that made every breath look temporary. I stood across the street for a minute before going in, watching people climb those steps with folders pressed to their chests like shields. Some looked nervous. Some looked tired. Vanessa looked entertained. She was already there near the entrance, surrounded by 3 friends, her mother, and a man named Brandon Pierce, the real estate broker she had been seeing behind my back while telling me she needed space to rediscover herself. Brandon had the kind of smile men where when they think another man's pain is already settled business. His coat probably cost more than my first truck. Vanessa saw me from a distance and laughed before I even reached the steps. Not loud enough for the whole block, just loud enough for me. That was always her gift, cutting with precision and then pretending the wound was imaginary. She leaned toward one of her friends and said something I could not hear, but I saw the eyes move over my old Navy suit, the one I had bought 6 years earlier for her cousin's wedding. The sleeve was a little tight. The cuffs were not perfect. I knew that. She knew that too. Her mother looked at me like I had shown up late to my own funeral. Brandon checked his watch. Vanessa walked toward me with the divorce papers tucked under one arm and said, "Caleb, I hope you did not take the bus." Her friend smiled. I did not. I just adjusted my tie and looked at the courthouse doors. Inside my jacket pocket was a sealed envelope from Whitaker and Cole, the law firm she did not know existed in my life. Inside that envelope was the reason I had not argued when she moved out, the reason I had not chased her when she posted dinner photos with Brandon, the reason I had signed nothing no matter how many times her attorney sent highlighted copies to my apartment. Vanessa believed today was about humiliating the husband she thought she had outgrown. She believed the judge would see a tired mechanic with overdue bills and a broken marriage, then hand her the house, the savings, and the last piece of dignity she had not already tried to take. She did not know about the commercial property downtown. She did not know about the private sale that closed 2 weeks earlier. She did not know the old repair shop she mocked had been sitting on land a hospital group wanted badly enough to pay $8 million for it. Most of all, she did not know I had arrived that morning in a black Lincoln driven by my attorney, parked behind the courthouse where she could not see it. I let her finish smiling. I let Brandon stand close enough to look victorious. I let her mother whisper, "Poor thing," as if poverty were a disease and I had finally reached the terminal stage. Then the courthouse doors opened, and my attorney stepped out in a charcoal suit, holding a leather folder with my name stamped on the tab. Vanessa's smile flickered for the first time. Not gone, just uncertain. That tiny crack was enough. I walked past her without raising my voice, without defending myself, without giving her the scene she had dressed up to enjoy. As I reached the door, she called after me, trying to sound amused. "Caleb, where did you get a lawyer like that?" I stopped, looked back once, and said, "You should have asked what I owned before you laughed at what I wore." Inside the courthouse, the air smelled like floor wax, paper, and cold coffee. The kind of smell that makes every problem feel official. Vanessa walked in behind me, but her steps had changed. Outside, they had clicked across the stone like applause. Inside, they slowed. My attorney, Daniel Whitaker, led me down the hallway without looking back, a leather folder under one arm, his expression as calm as a man carrying weather reports instead of legal documents. I could feel Vanessa watching us. I could feel Brandon trying to understand the shape of the room he had just walked into. That was the thing about men like Brandon. They knew how to look expensive in restaurants, but courthouses exposed the difference between confidence and preparation. We stopped outside courtroom 4, where the wooden benches were half full of people waiting for their lives to be rearranged by strangers in suits. Vanessa stood near the opposite wall with her attorney, Patricia Lang, a sharp woman with silver glasses and a voice that sounded like it charged by the syllable. Patricia gave me a quick glance, then looked back at Daniel. Her face stayed professional, but her eyes narrowed just enough. Lawyers recognize other lawyers the way mechanics recognize engine trouble by sound. Vanessa whispered something to her. Patricia did not smile back. That was the second crack. I sat on the bench and placed my hands together. No shaking, no clenched fists, just stillness. 3 years earlier, stillness would have been impossible. 3 years earlier, I would have been desperate to explain, desperate to defend myself, desperate to make Vanessa remember the man I had been before she started measuring me by the labels on my shirts. But humiliation, if it lasts long enough, teaches discipline. You learn not to react every time someone pokes the bruise. You learn to save your breath for the moment it matters. Vanessa had spent the last 6 months building a story. Caleb was broke. Caleb was bitter. Caleb could not give her the lifestyle she deserved. Caleb should be grateful if she left him with his tools and a used couch. She said it in texts. She implied it at family dinners. She let Brandon say it with his smirk and his easy hand on the back of her chair. At first, it hurt. Then it clarified. Pain is messy when it first arrives. Later, if you let it cool, it becomes information. The clerk called our names at 9:05. Vanessa lifted her chin and walked in first, like she was entering a room built to agree with her. I followed Daniel to our table. Brandon sat in the back row, beside Vanessa's mother, his arms folded, pretending not to look nervous. The judge entered, and everyone stood. The room went quiet. Not dramatic quiet. Legal quiet. Heavy, fluorescent, unavoidable. Patricia opened by describing a marriage where Vanessa had outgrown financial instability, where she had carried emotional strain, where she deserved a fair division of assets and temporary support while rebuilding her life. Rebuilding. I almost smiled at that word. Vanessa sat straight, eyes forward, playing wounded dignity with impressive posture. Then Patricia mentioned the house, the joint savings, and the repair shop, calling it a modest business with limited future value. Limited future value. Daniel wrote something on his yellow legal pad and slid it toward me. 3 words. Let her finish. So I did. Patricia kept going. She described me as underemployed, financially inconsistent, and unlikely to produce meaningful assets beyond the marital home. Vanessa's mouth softened at the corners. She thought the performance was working. Then Daniel stood. He buttoned his jacket slowly, not for style, but rhythm. Some men clear their throats before changing a room. Daniel only opened the folder. Your Honor, he said, before we respond to support and division, we need to correct a material assumption regarding Mr. Turner's business interests. Vanessa turned her head. Patricia went still. Brandon leaned forward. Daniel placed the first document on the table. Not the big one. Not yet. Just enough to change the temperature. A purchase inquiry. A zoning letter. A signed confidentiality agreement from the Hospital Development Group. The judge put on his glasses. Vanessa's smile disappeared completely. I looked straight ahead, calm as steel, while the room began learning what she had laughed too early to ask. The judge lifted the zoning letter first, then the purchase inquiry, then the confidentiality agreement, and each page seemed to remove a little more color from Vanessa's face. I did not look at her for long. That was a temptation, and temptation makes a man sloppy. I kept my eyes on the bench, on the flag behind it, on the steady movement of Daniel Whitaker's hand as he laid out the sequence one document at a time. He explained that Turner Auto Repair was not just a small shop with 2 service bays, a cracked sidewalk, and a coffee machine that burned more coffee than it brewed. It sat on 2 adjoining commercial lots near a planned medical expansion corridor. My father had bought the first lot in 1988, back when that part of Columbus was mostly warehouses, tired storefronts, and men eating lunch from metal boxes in their trucks. I bought the second lot 12 years later with money Vanessa said I should have spent on a better house, because she never understood land. She understood chandeliers, leases, designer bags, and the kind of dinners where people photographed dessert. Land did not impress her because land was patient. It looked boring until the world needed it. Daniel told the court the Hospital Development Group had approached me 18 months earlier. Not last week. Not after Vanessa filed. 18 months. I had not announced it because the deal required discretion, environmental review, zoning steps, and a clean title history. The judge asked if the sale had closed. Daniel paused just long enough for the silence to gather weight. Yes, Your Honor. 2 weeks ago. Patricia Lang's pen stopped moving. Vanessa turned toward me so fast that one of her earrings caught the light like a spark. The amount? The judge asked. Daniel slid the closing statement forward. $8,140,000 before taxes and secured obligations. The room did not gasp. Real life is quieter than movies. But I felt the shift. Brandon stopped leaning forward. Vanessa's mother placed a hand over her mouth. Vanessa stared at the paper as if numbers could betray her personally. I remembered the nights she mocked that shop. The smell of oil in your clothes is embarrassing, Caleb. Your hands always look dirty, Caleb. Brandon owns 3 rental properties, Caleb. I used to wash my hands until the knuckles cracked, trying to scrub away the proof of how hard I worked. Then one day I stopped. A man should not apologize for honest labor just because someone else worships polished surfaces. Daniel continued. The proceeds were not marital cash sitting loose for division. A large portion was already designated for business debt, tax reserves, employee transition payments, and a separate trust established before the petition date to preserve obligations tied to the original property transfer from my father. Patricia objected, calm but quick. Daniel answered, calmer and quicker. The judge asked questions. Daniel had documents. That was the rhythm. Question. Document. Objection. Document. Assumption. Document. Vanessa's story started losing pieces. Poor husband. Document. Worthless shop. Document. No future value. Document. By the time Daniel finished the first stack, the courthouse felt smaller, the air heavier, the fluorescent lights more honest than kind. Vanessa leaned toward Patricia and whispered, but I heard enough. She said, he never told me. That almost broke my stillness. Not because it was false, but because of what it revealed. She did not say, I never asked. She did not say, I never cared. She did not say, I was too busy laughing at the man who kept the lights on. She said I never told her, as if my dignity had been a locked cabinet she was entitled to open only after deciding to leave. The judge called a brief recess, and chairs scraped across the floor. Brandon stood quickly and stepped into the hallway, phone already in his hand. Vanessa remained seated for a moment, frozen in the wreckage of her own assumptions. When she finally looked at me, her eyes were not mocking anymore. They were calculating. That hurt more than the laughter. Laughter meant she thought I was beneath her. Calculation meant she suddenly wondered what else she could take. During the recess, I stepped into the hallway with Daniel Whitaker while Vanessa stayed behind at counsel table, pretending to study papers she had not cared about 10 minutes earlier. The courthouse hallway was narrow and pale, with vending machines humming near the elevators and old framed notices hanging crooked on the walls. People passed us carrying folders, coffee cups, and the tired expressions of lives interrupted by legal language. Daniel handed me a bottle of water and said, she is going to change strategy now. I nodded. I had already seen it in her eyes. The mockery was gone, replaced by interest, and interest from Vanessa had always come with a price tag. That was how our marriage had changed, slowly at first, then all at once. In the beginning, she used to visit the shop after work in jeans and sneakers, bringing sandwiches wrapped in foil, laughing when I left fingerprints of grease on the counter. She said she liked that I built things with my hands. She said men like me were rare. Back then, I believed her because I wanted to. We met at a county fair outside Dayton, under strings of cheap lights and the smell of kettle corn. She was 27, bright, restless, and beautiful in a way that made every man near her straighten his back. I was 30, running the shop after my father's heart surgery, wearing a flannel shirt with a name patch still stitched over the pocket. She spilled lemonade on my boots and apologized like it was the most dramatic accident of her life. I laughed. She laughed. For a while, that was enough. We married 2 years later in a small church with carpet the color of old wine and flowers from a grocery store. My father stood beside me with tears in his eyes, proud like I had won something sacred. Vanessa promised to stand with me in lean seasons and full ones. I remembered that phrase clearly because lean seasons were all I knew. Full ones were still a dream. We bought a little house with a sagging porch, ate frozen lasagna on paper plates, and counted every dollar twice. I worked 12-hour days, sometimes more, because the shop was not just a job. It was inheritance. It was my father's bad knees, my mother's careful budgeting, and the sound of tools clicking into drawers after closing time. Vanessa used to say she respected that. Then respect became tolerance. Tolerance became embarrassment. Embarrassment became contempt. The first time she corrected me in public, we were at dinner with her new friends from a real estate networking group. I mentioned replacing a transmission, and she smiled too brightly and said, "Caleb means he still works at the garage." Everyone chuckled. I did too, because men are trained to swallow small cuts when they happen at nice tables. Later, she told me I was too sensitive. That phrase became her favorite eraser. Too sensitive when Brandon started texting her about investment properties after 10 at night. Too sensitive when she stopped wearing her wedding ring to social events because it did not match the look. Too sensitive when she called my shop a dead-end business in front of her mother, who nodded like she had been waiting years for permission. I kept working. I kept paying. I kept believing that if I could just get through the hospital deal, if I could just close the sale and show her what patience had built, she might remember who I was. But money does not repair disrespect. It only reveals whether it was always there. Daniel's voice pulled me back to the hallway. "Do you want to proceed exactly as planned?" I looked through the courtroom doors and saw Vanessa speaking quickly to Patricia, one hand moving over the table like she was rearranging the future. Brandon was still in the hallway, pacing by the windows, his phone pressed to his ear, no longer looking like the man who had arrived to watch me lose. I took one drink of water and tightened the cap. "Yes," I said. "Exactly as planned." Daniel studied me for a second, then nodded. "Good. Because the next document is the one she will feel." I knew which one he meant. Not the sale statement. Not the zoning letter. The trust. The document my father signed years before Vanessa ever laughed at my old suit, before Brandon ever existed in our marriage, before anyone looked at that cracked sidewalk and saw $8 million hiding under it. My father had protected the land from people who only respected harvest after mocking the dirt. And now, Vanessa was about to learn that some roots run deeper than marriage papers. When we returned to courtroom 4, Vanessa was no longer smiling at anyone. She sat with her shoulders squared, her hands folded neatly on the table, performing calm the way some people perform kindness when witnesses are present. Patricia Lang had reorganized her notes into 3 clean stacks, and Brandon had slipped back into the rear bench with his phone face down on his knee. That told me plenty. Men who are confident do not hide their screens. The judge looked over the documents Daniel had already submitted and asked whether the parties were ready to proceed. Daniel stood. "Yes, Your Honor." His voice did not rise. It did not need to. He took one document from the leather folder, a thick packet with a blue tab, and placed it on the table like he was setting down a stone in the middle of a river. "This is the Turner Family Land Trust, executed by Mr. Turner's father in 2004, amended in 2011, and acknowledged again before the second parcel was acquired." Patricia leaned forward immediately. Vanessa's eyes moved from the packet to my face. I did not move. Stillness had become the only language I trusted in that room. Daniel explained that the original shop property had not been simply handed to me as a marital asset. It had passed through a family trust with specific conditions. The land could be used for business, developed, leased, or sold, but proceeds connected to the original parcel were subject to protected obligations, including tax reserves, business continuity, employee severance, and reinvestment provisions tied to my father's estate plan. The judge read silently. Pages turned. The sound was soft, devastatingly soft. Patricia objected that Vanessa had contributed to the marriage during the period the property appreciated. Daniel did not argue with the marriage. He corrected the premise. Mrs. Turner did not contribute capital, labor, debt service, or management to the shop or the land acquisition, Your Honor. Her name never appeared on the title, the loan documents, the environmental filings, the zoning applications, or the sale negotiations. Vanessa's face tightened. I remembered every time she said my shop smelled like failure. Every dinner she skipped because she did not want to sit across from a man who came home tired. Every holiday where she praised Brandon's investment deals while I stood at the sink washing dishes in a shirt that still smelled faintly of motor oil. She had wanted the shine, not the work. Now she wanted the harvest, not the dirt. Daniel turned another page. Additionally, the second parcel was purchased with proceeds traceable to a premarital business account and later folded into the same business structure before any hospital group approached Mr. Turner. We have bank records, title history, and trust correspondence to support that. The judge asked Patricia whether she had reviewed the trust. Patricia's jaw shifted. We received partial disclosure late. Your Honor, Daniel answered before the implication could grow legs. The trust was disclosed in response to the first formal asset request. Prior filings from opposing counsel characterized the shop as low-value personal business property and did not request title instruments until last week. That was true. Vanessa had not looked deeply because Vanessa had been too busy laughing. She assumed poor men have simple paperwork. That was her third mistake. Brandon leaned toward Vanessa's mother in the back row and whispered something. She did not respond. For the first time all morning, even she looked unsure which side of certainty to stand on. The judge finally set the trust packet down and said the court would not treat the full sale proceeds as freely divisible marital cash without further review of the trust structure and traceability evidence. Clean sentence. Quiet sentence. The kind that turns a fantasy into a problem. Vanessa blinked quickly, then whispered to Patricia again. This time, Patricia shook her head once, barely visible, but I saw it. No, that one motion carried more truth than all of Vanessa's speeches. No, you cannot simply claim it. No, he was not as empty as you said. No, the poor husband did not walk in alone. Daniel sat down beside me and slid his pen back into the folder. I looked at the table, at the wood grain under the courthouse lights, and felt my father with me in a way I had not expected. Not like a ghost, like a lesson finally arriving on time. He used to say, "Caleb, never confuse quiet land with empty land. People do that with men too." That morning, Vanessa learned both. After the recess, we returned to courtroom 4, and Vanessa's posture had shifted subtly but unmistakably. Her shoulders were squared, her gaze focused, but the lightness in her step was gone, replaced by careful calculation. Daniel Whitaker and I walked back to our table, carrying only confidence and the documents that held the weight of truth, while Patricia Lang adjusted her papers as if realigning a battlefield. The judge called the session to order, and the hum of the fluorescent lights filled the quiet pauses between our legal breaths. Daniel began presenting the next set of documents. The detailed trust allocations, bank account statements tracing the business purchases, and correspondence with the hospital development group, all showing that proceeds from the properties were legally bound, leaving Vanessa with less freedom to claim them as she had assumed. Vanessa shifted slightly, glancing at Brandon, who was now leaning back, phone in hand, realizing the shift in control. I remained still, calm, exuding an authority born from preparation and patience, knowing each page, each figure, each sentence would speak louder than any protest she might offer. The judge reviewed the trust packets carefully, occasionally raising his glasses to read numbers and names aloud, confirming the legitimacy of the allocations. Vanessa's mother leaned forward slightly, the first sign of unease, while Vanessa whispered questions to Patricia, who could offer little reassurance given the clear evidence. The clerk passed documents between counsel, each one reinforcing that the property, once mocked as worthless by Vanessa, was a significant asset secured by law, not open to arbitrary division. Daniel explained the timeline, highlighting that all acquisitions, sales, and trust amendments occurred before the petition and that none of Vanessa's contributions altered the designated ownership or obligations tied to the trust, proving that mischaracterizations in prior filings were inaccurate. Vanessa's expression, once smug, was now tense and calculating, realizing that her assumptions about me, my wealth, and my perceived weakness had all been based on incomplete knowledge. Brandon's subtle confidence began to falter as the implications of legal ownership became clear. The judge requested a short recess to review the new materials, and as people moved about the courtroom, Vanessa's friends shifted uneasily in their seats, whispering among themselves. I remained seated, maintaining composure, noting the shifts in body language and awareness that my strategy had caused a ripple effect. Daniel leaned slightly, whispering that the next step involved showing the final allocation and distribution plan, which would illustrate that every move I had made was both legally sound and strategically placed, ensuring that the control and dignity I had maintained throughout the process could not be undermined. The atmosphere in the room had changed. Quiet authority replaced assumptions, and preparation outweighed any prior arrogance. Vanessa's earlier confidence was now tempered by awareness of what she had underestimated: the full scope of legal foresight, the structured trust, and the deliberate patience that had allowed me to arrive at this moment fully prepared, calm, and in control. When the judge returned, the courtroom stood, then sat, and the sound of bodies settling into wooden benches felt louder than it should have. Vanessa kept her eyes forward now. Brandon no longer looked like a man attending someone else's downfall. He looked like a man recalculating whether the woman beside him had misunderstood the investment. Daniel Whitaker opened the final allocation file, the red-tabbed one he had kept at the bottom of the folder all morning. I knew what was inside. I had read it 3 times in his office, each time hearing my father's voice somewhere behind the legal language. Pay your people first. Keep your word. Do not let greedy hands turn your work into their reward. Daniel explained that after taxes, secured debts, employee transition payments, and the trust obligations connected to the original property, the funds Vanessa imagined as a loose pile of cash were already assigned to specific lawful purposes. The shop was closing, but my men were not being thrown away. 4 employees who had stayed with me through slow winters and broken lifts had severance packages funded. 2 older mechanics had health coverage extensions. My father's remaining medical debts were cleared. A portion was reserved for a smaller diagnostic garage I planned to open on leased space across town, not because I needed to keep turning wrenches, but because work had never been my shame. It had been my proof. Patricia Lang asked whether these allocations were created to reduce Vanessa's claim. Daniel did not flinch. He slid the dates forward. Drafted before the petition. Approved before service. Supported by trust obligations and business continuity provisions. Again, the rhythm returned. Question. Document. Doubt. Document. Vanessa stared at me as if the man in the old suit had been replaced by someone she could not name. That was the strange thing. I had not changed in that courtroom. Not really. I was still Caleb Turner. Same hands. Same history. Same quiet. The only thing that changed was what she knew. People call that a reveal, but it is more like daylight. Nothing new appears. You just stop being able to deny what was already there. Then Patricia made the move Daniel warned me about. She shifted from money to character. She described Vanessa as a supportive spouse who had endured years of financial uncertainty, social isolation, and emotional distance. She said my silence made partnership impossible. My silence. That word sat on the table between us like a tool someone had picked up without knowing how to use it. Daniel opened another folder. Your Honor, if opposing counsel is raising conduct and credibility, we have relevant correspondence. Vanessa's head turned. Fast. Daniel did not dump the messages dramatically. He submitted them in a clean stack. Texts where Vanessa called the shop a dead-end garage. Messages where she joked to Brandon that court day would be fun. A photo she had sent to friends of the courthouse steps with the caption, "Last day carrying dead weight." The judge read silently. Patricia's face tightened. Vanessa's mother looked down at her hands. Brandon suddenly became very interested in the floor. I did not feel triumph. I thought I would. For months, I imagined the day her own words would stand up and speak. But when it happened, I felt something quieter, sadder. There is a grief in being proven right about someone you once loved. Daniel's voice softened but stayed firm. Mr. Turner did not create public embarrassment today. He responded to repeated mischaracterizations with evidence. He did not ask the court to punish Mrs. Turner for leaving the marriage. He asks only that the court distinguish between marital division and a protected family business structure she dismissed until it became valuable. The judge set the messages down and looked at Vanessa. Mrs. Turner, this court is not interested in humiliation. It is interested in accuracy. 5 words in that sentence changed the room. Not interested in humiliation. Vanessa had dressed for one kind of ending and walked into another. The preliminary order did not give either side everything. Real courts rarely do. But it denied her emergency support request based on the incomplete financial picture she had presented. It required a full review of the trust before any claim against the sale proceeds could move forward. It preserved the business allocations. It blocked any immediate attempt to freeze the protected funds. Clean. Temporary. Devastating. When the gavel tapped, the sound was small, almost polite. But Vanessa flinched. Outside the courtroom, she waited near the hallway windows, her friends gone quiet around her, Brandon standing 3 steps away instead of beside her. Distance tells the truth when mouths still lie. She said my name softly as I passed. Caleb. I stopped, but I did not turn right away. For years, I would have turned too quickly. Grateful for the tone. Hungry for the smallest kindness. Not now. When I finally looked at her, she said, "You could have told me." I thought about the shop, the land, my father, the old suit, the jokes, the courthouse steps, the way she had planned to make my poverty part of her celebration. My voice came out calm. "I did not hide who I was, Vanessa. You just stopped looking." After the preliminary order, the courtroom felt both heavier and quieter, as if every person present had absorbed the subtle shift in authority. Vanessa sat at the counsel table, her posture rigid, hands clasped tightly over the papers she had once waved with mockery, now uncertain how to act with precision. Brandon stayed nearby, but had stopped leaning forward. The confidence he carried when arriving to witness humiliation had dissolved into calculation and unease. Daniel Whitaker whispered to me that the next phase was procedural but critical, involving final confirmations of the trust allocations and legal obligations tied to every dollar of the sale. I nodded, understanding that the victory had not come from confrontation, but from patience, strategy, and preparation. The judge returned to the bench, glancing at both sides with a calm that implied he understood how swiftly assumptions could mislead. He requested documentation verifying that the distribution of proceeds complied with trust obligations and business continuity measures. Daniel methodically laid out folders containing finalized allocations, tax records, and legal notices, each sheet carefully marked and organized, each reflecting transactions that had been planned, recorded, and executed with exacting precision. Vanessa's eyes flicked over the documents, the color draining slowly from her expression as she realized that the evidence had removed any ambiguity from the court's understanding. Her mother shifted uneasily, sensing the change in tone and authority, while Brandon quietly reviewed the materials, realizing that his previous confidence had been based on incomplete information. I kept my composure, seated, hands folded, exuding calm control as Daniel continued to walk the court through every item, every obligation, every protection the trust provided. The judge asked pointed questions, which Daniel answered with steady clarity, confirming that all allocations were properly executed, legally binding, and unaffected by spousal claims not documented in the original structure. Patricia Lang interjected briefly, attempting to challenge points regarding contributions during the marriage, but Daniel countered with dates, documents, and notarized confirmations, leaving little room for dispute. Vanessa's mouth tightened and her eyes darted toward me as if searching for a reaction, but I did not offer one. My stillness communicated the authority of preparation more effectively than words ever could. Outside the immediate court proceedings, whispers among onlookers reflected astonishment at the meticulous clarity of the documentation and the precision of execution, signaling that the underestimation of a quiet, patient man could be catastrophic when the truth was fully revealed. The judge concluded the review by acknowledging the completeness and accuracy of the allocations, emphasizing that the protected funds could not be treated as free marital cash, and that any claims would require careful legal scrutiny against the established trust structure. Vanessa's face revealed the first traces of true uncertainty, a departure from the calculated mockery she had employed all morning. Brandon's posture stiffened, realizing that the narrative he had assumed was under control had been upended. My own sense of satisfaction was measured, quiet, grounded in the understanding that real authority was demonstrated through preparation and patience, not spectacle. When the gavel struck lightly to close the segment, Vanessa whispered my name. "Caleb." I turned slowly, offering a composed gaze, allowing the weight of the proceedings, the clarity of evidence, and the certainty of truth to communicate more than words ever could, leaving her to reckon with the reality she had overlooked for too long. By the time I stepped out of the courthouse, the November air felt different against my face. Not warmer, not softer, just honest. The gray sky still hung over Columbus, the traffic still moved along Broad Street, and the courthouse steps were still the same limestone steps Vanessa had planned to use as a stage for my embarrassment. But the audience was gone now. Her friends had scattered into quiet corners. Brandon stood near the curb, pretending to check messages while slowly creating distance from the woman he had arrived beside. Vanessa remained under the courthouse awning with her mother, holding a folder that no longer looked like a weapon. It looked heavy. Daniel Whitaker walked beside me to the black Lincoln and asked if I wanted to leave through the rear exit. I looked back once at the building, Then at the sidewalk where Vanessa had laughed at my suit that morning. No, I said. Front door is fine. That was the first time all day I felt something close to peace. Not happiness. Peace. Happiness is loud and temporary. Peace stands still. Before I reached the car, Vanessa called my name again. Caleb. This time, I turned. She walked toward me slowly, careful with every step, like the ground had become less reliable. Her voice was smaller than I remembered. I did not know about the trust. I did not know about the sale. I thought you were hiding things from me. I looked at her, at the woman I had married in a grocery store flower church, the woman who once brought foil-wrapped sandwiches to the shop, the woman who later turned my work into a punchline because another man wore better coats. Maybe part of her believed what she was saying. Maybe people who rewrite a marriage eventually forget the first draft. I said, Vanessa, you were not angry because I hid the money. You were angry because the money made you realize I was never the man you mocked. Her eyes filled, but I did not move toward her. There was a time when one tear from her would have pulled me across any distance. That time had passed quietly, one insult at a time. Brandon opened his car door behind her. She heard it. So did I? She looked back, and his face told the rest of the story. He had come for a spectacle. He was leaving before the cleanup. I almost felt sorry for her then. Almost. Daniel opened the Lincoln door, and I placed one hand on the roof before getting in. Vanessa whispered, what happens now? I thought about my father, the shop, the men whose severance checks would clear, the smaller garage I would open across town, and the home I would rebuild without someone measuring my value by how shiny my shoes were. Now, I said, we finished the divorce honestly. No speeches, no revenge line, just the truth. A month later, the final paperwork moved forward with fewer games. The trust remained protected. The business obligations stayed intact. Vanessa received what the law allowed, not what her mockery expected. Brandon disappeared from her social media before Christmas. That did not surprise me. Men like him prefer winners when winning looks easy. I leased a smaller shop on the west side, clean floors, new lifts, bright windows, and a coffee machine that still burned the first pot every morning. Some habits survive success. On opening day, my old crew stood beside me while I unlocked the door. No cameras, no applause, just men who had worked hard and were still standing. I wore the same navy suit jacket Vanessa laughed at, not because I had to, but because I wanted to remember that dignity was never in the fabric. It was in the man wearing it. So tell me, if you had been standing on those courthouse steps, mocked before the truth came out, would you have exposed everything right away, or waited until the documents could speak louder than anger? And if stories like this remind you that quiet people are not empty people, stay with this channel, because sometimes the strongest comeback is not a shout. It is a sealed folder, a steady voice, and a life rebuilt where no one gets to laugh at your worth again.